For 43 years, I believed my son was dead. The hospital told me he didn't survive the birth, and I carried that pain every single day of my life. But at 65, a phone call would shatter everything I thought I knew about that terrible night in 1979. For 43 years, I believed my son was dead. The hospital told me he didn't survive the birth, and I carried that pain every single day of my life. But at 65, a phone call would shatter everything I thought I knew about that terrible night in 1979. My name is Margaret, and this is the story that changed my entire world. I was just 22 years old when I found out I was pregnant. It was 1979, and I was unmarried, scared, and completely alone. My parents had disowned me when they found out, calling me a disgrace to the family name. The father of my child had disappeared the moment I told him the news, leaving me with nothing but shame and an uncertain future. I worked double shifts at a diner just to afford a tiny apartment and save money for the baby. Every night, I would talk to my unborn child, promising that despite everything, I would love them unconditionally. I had chosen the name David for a boy and Sarah for a girl. I had dreams of teaching them to ride a bike, helping them with homework, and watching them graduate. Those dreams were the only thing that kept me going during those dark months. The labor was difficult. I was alone at the hospital, with no family, no friends, just the cold sterility of the maternity ward. After 18 hours of excruciating pain, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, my baby's first cry. It was a boy. My David had arrived, and for a brief moment, everything felt perfect. But that moment lasted only seconds. The nurses quickly took him away, saying they needed to check him. I begged to hold him, just once, but they insisted he needed immediate medical attention. Hours passed. Then a doctor I had never seen before came into my room with the most devastating news a mother could hear. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson," he said with clinical detachment, "your baby didn't make it. There were complications we couldn't overcome." My world collapsed in that instant. The baby I had carried for 9 months, the child I had already loved more than life itself, was gone. They wouldn't let me see him, claiming it would be too traumatic. They said it was better this way, that I was young and could try again someday. But how could they understand? This wasn't just any baby, this was my David, my son, my everything. What happened next still haunts me to this day. A social worker appeared at my bedside with papers to sign. Through my tears and grief, she explained that I needed to sign documents for the burial arrangements. I was so broken, so devastated, that I could barely function. I signed whatever they put in front of me, trusting that these professionals knew what was best. I never questioned why I couldn't arrange the funeral myself, or why they were so insistent about handling everything. If you've ever experienced the loss of a child, please share the word strength in the comments below. Your story matters, and this community is here to support each other. Don't forget to subscribe for more life stories that remind us we're never truly alone in our struggles. I left that hospital empty-handed and empty-hearted. The apartment I had prepared for my baby felt like a tomb. I had bought a crib, tiny clothes, bottles, everything a new mother needs. Now it all served as cruel reminders of what I had lost. I packed everything away and moved to a different city, trying to escape the memories that followed me everywhere. The years that followed were a blur of survival and sorrow. I threw myself into work, first as a waitress, then eventually working my way up to managing a small restaurant. I dated occasionally, but could never fully open my heart to anyone. How could I explain the constant ache in my chest, the way I would freeze whenever I saw mothers with their children, or the way I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I heard a baby crying? I never married, though I came close once. Robert was a kind man who tried to understand my pain, but whenever he talked about having children together, I would shut down. How could I risk going through that loss again? How could I betray David's memory by trying to replace him? So I remained alone, building walls around my heart that seemed impenetrable. Every year on David's birthday, I would visit a small cemetery across town and sit by a bench, imagining what he would have been like. Would he have had my green eyes or his father's dark hair? Would he have been good at sports, or maybe preferred books like I did? I would bring flowers and talk to him as if he could hear me, telling him about my life, my work, my loneliness, and most importantly, how much I missed him. The pain never truly went away, but I learned to carry it differently. Some days were better than others. I found solace in helping young mothers at the restaurant where I worked, offering them advice, sometimes even babysitting their children when they needed help. It was bittersweet, but it gave me a sense of purpose, a way to honor the mother I never got to be. By my 50s, I had built a comfortable if solitary life. I had my own small house, a garden that I tended with care, and a routine that kept me busy. But there was always that empty space, that void that nothing could fill. I had gone to therapy, joined support groups, and tried everything to heal, but some wounds, I believed, were simply too deep to ever fully close. Then came my 65th birthday. I was in my kitchen, making myself a quiet dinner, when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. I received so few calls that I assumed it was a telemarketer. But something made me pick up that phone, and the voice on the other end would change everything I thought I knew about my life. "Is this Margaret Thompson?" the voice asked. It was a man, middle-aged by the sound of it, with a slight tremor in his voice. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Who is this?" There was a long pause, and then words that stopped my heart. "My name is David Mitchell. I think you might be my mother." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. David. The name I had chosen for my son 43 years ago. This had to be some cruel joke, some scammer who had somehow learned about my past. But something in his voice, something desperate and hopeful and terrified all at once, made me stay on the line. "That's impossible," I whispered. "My son died at birth. 43 years ago." "I know that's what they told you," he said, and I could hear him crying now. "But I'm alive, Mom. I've been looking for you my entire life." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Everything I had believed, every tear I had cried, every lonely birthday I had mourned, could it all have been based on a lie? My legs gave out, and I sank into a chair, clutching the phone like a lifeline. How did you find me?" I managed to ask. "DNA," he said. "I submitted my DNA to one of those ancestry websites 2 years ago, hoping to find any biological family. Last week, I got a match, a distant cousin who helped me trace the family tree back to you. But it wasn't easy. It took months of detective work, old records, and a private investigator to piece everything together." He went on to explain that he had been adopted as an infant by a loving family named the Mitchells. They had always been honest with him about his adoption, but they had been told that his birth mother had died in childbirth. For 43 years, both of us had been living with the same lie that the other was dead. But the most incredible part was still to come, and trust me, You won't want to miss what happened when we finally met face to face. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is just getting started, and the reunion that follows will restore your faith in miracles. As David spoke, sharing details about his life, I felt like I was living in a dream. He told me about his adoptive parents, who had given him a wonderful childhood full of love and opportunities. He had become a teacher, married his college sweetheart, and had 2 children, my grandchildren. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I had spent decades avoiding motherhood because of my loss, somewhere out there, the son I thought was dead was building the exact kind of family I had always dreamed of having with him. He described growing up always feeling like something was missing, despite having loving adoptive parents. He would look at himself in mirrors, wondering where his green eyes came from, or why he had such a love for gardening when no one else in his family shared that interest. He had always felt a pull to find his biological mother, not out of any dissatisfaction with his life, but out of a deep need to understand where he came from. "I used to imagine what you were like," he said through tears. "I created this whole fantasy about who you might be, what you might look like. I hoped that maybe you were out there somewhere, wondering about me too. But when the adoption agency told me you had died, I felt so guilty for even wanting to find you. How could I dishonor the parents who raised me by searching for someone who was gone?" The adoption agency. Those words hit me like a physical blow. As David continued talking, the pieces of a horrific puzzle began falling into place. The doctor I had never seen before. The social worker with the papers. The refusal to let me see my baby or arrange the funeral myself. The insistence that it would be better this way. "David," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "Who handled your adoption? What agency?" "Sacred Heart Children's Services," he replied. "Why?" "Sacred Heart." The same organization that had handled what I thought was my son's burial. The same social worker who had appeared at my bedside with papers I had signed in my grief-stricken state. The horrifying truth began to dawn on me: I hadn't signed burial papers. I had unknowingly signed adoption papers, giving away my healthy, living son while being told he was dead. "They stole you from me," I whispered, the words coming out as a broken sob. "They told me you were dead, and they stole you from me." The silence on the other end of the line stretched on forever. When David finally spoke, his voice was filled with the same devastation I was feeling. "You mean, you didn't give me up voluntarily?" "Never," I said fiercely. "I would have died before giving you up. I loved you from the moment I knew you existed." "They told me you died, David. They told me my baby was dead." What we discovered in the weeks that followed would expose a scandal that had affected dozens of families. Sacred Heart Children's Services had been operating an illegal adoption ring in the late 1970s and early 1980s, targeting young, unmarried mothers with no family support. They would tell these vulnerable women that their babies had died during or shortly after birth, while simultaneously placing those same healthy infants with wealthy families willing to pay enormous sums for private adoptions. The scheme was elaborate and cruel. They had doctors on their payroll who would falsify medical records, social workers who would pressure grieving mothers to sign papers they didn't understand, and administrators who would destroy evidence of the crimes. My case was just one of many young women who had been robbed of their children and told their babies were dead, while those same children grew up believing their birth mothers had abandoned them. But in that moment, none of the legal implications mattered. All that mattered was that my son was alive, and after 43 years of believing he was gone forever, I was going to see him again. We arranged to meet the following weekend at a small cafe halfway between our cities. I had 6 days to prepare for a moment I had dreamed about for over 4 decades. Those 6 days were the longest and shortest of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the upcoming reunion. I looked through old photos, trying to imagine what David might look like now. I practiced what I would say, how I would explain the pain I had carried, how I would tell him that not a day had gone by when I didn't think about him. I also agonized over whether he could ever forgive the system that had separated us, and more importantly, whether he might somehow blame me for not fighting harder, not asking more questions, not somehow knowing that he was still alive. The rational part of my mind knew that I had been a victim too, but the mother's heart that had carried guilt and grief for so long wasn't entirely convinced. The day of our meeting arrived gray and drizzly, matching my nervous energy. I arrived at the cafe 30 minutes early and chose a table by the window where I could watch for him. He had sent me a recent photo, but seeing someone in a picture is nothing compared to seeing them in person. At exactly 2 p.m., a man walked through the cafe door, and I knew instantly it was him. He was tall, like his father, but he had my eyes, the same green eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. His hair was dark with streaks of gray at the temples, and he moved with a careful, measured gait that reminded me of myself. But it was his smile, nervous and hopeful and slightly crooked, that nearly brought me to my knees. It was the same smile I had imagined on my baby's face all those years ago. Our eyes met across the cafe, and for a moment, the world stopped. Here was my son, my David, alive and real and beautiful. I stood up on shaking legs, and he walked toward me slowly, as if afraid that sudden movement might make this moment disappear. When he was just a few feet away, he stopped and whispered, "Mom?" That single word broke something open in my chest. All the years of pain, all the nights of crying, all the birthdays spent mourning, it all poured out of me at once. I opened my arms, and he stepped into them, and finally, after 43 years, I was holding my son. We both cried in that cafe, not caring about the other patrons or the waitresses who were trying to give us privacy. We cried for all the lost years, for all the moments we should have shared, for all the pain we had both carried unnecessarily. But we also cried with relief and joy and the overwhelming happiness of finding each other again. When we finally sat down, still holding hands across the table, the words poured out of both of us. He told me about his childhood, his achievements, his struggles, his joys. I told him about the garden I had planted in his honor, the bench where I would sit and talk to him, the way I had carried his memory every single day. We discovered that we both loved reading mysteries, that we both had a tendency to hum when we were nervous, and that we both had an irrational fear of butterflies that we couldn't explain. But the most amazing discovery was yet to come. David pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of his children, my grandchildren. Emma, who was 15 and had inherited those same green eyes that connected 3 generations. And Michael, who was 12 and had David's gentle smile but my stubborn chin. They knew about me, David explained. He had told them about his search, and they were excited to meet their grandmother. "They've been asking about you since I started looking," he said with a smile. "Emma especially. She's been begging me to find you so she could have a grandmother who might teach her to bake. She's convinced that all grandmothers know secret family recipes." The irony made me laugh through my tears. I had spent so many years convinced I would never be a mother, and here I was, not only reunited with my son but discovering that I was already a grandmother to 2 beautiful children who wanted to know me. As we continued talking, sharing 43 years of life in one afternoon, I realized that while we couldn't get back the time we had lost, we had something precious ahead of us. David was not just my infant son anymore. He was a remarkable man who had built a beautiful life despite the circumstances of his beginning. And now that life could include me. Before we parted that day, David asked me something that took my breath away. "Would you like to come to dinner next Sunday and meet your grandchildren officially? We're having a family dinner, and there's an empty chair at our table that's been waiting for you." The weeks and months that followed were like living in a fairy tale. I met Emma and Michael, who welcomed me into their lives with the easy acceptance that children have for love in any form. Emma did indeed want to learn family recipes, and we spent hours in my kitchen while I taught her to make my mother's apple pie and my grandmother's chocolate cake. Michael, I discovered, shared my love of gardening, and we worked together to plant a special section in my backyard that we called the Memory Garden, a place to honor both the pain we had endured and the joy we had found. David and I attended family therapy together to work through the complex emotions of our reunion. We had to learn how to be mother and son as adults, how to navigate the relationship we should have had with the relationship we could actually have. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes the weight of lost time felt overwhelming. Sometimes one of us would say something that reminded the other of all the moments we had missed. But what sustained us was the love that had somehow survived 43 years of separation. The bond between mother and child, I learned, is not something that can be broken by distance or time or even the cruelest lies. It lives somewhere deeper than memory, somewhere beyond conscious thought. It had kept David searching for me even when he believed I was dead, and it had kept me talking to him every year on his birthday even though I thought he couldn't hear me. As I'm telling you this story today, it's been 2 years since that life-changing phone call. David and I talk almost every day now. I attend Emma's school plays and Michael's soccer games. I spend holidays with my family, a word I never thought I'd be able to use. I've become the grandmother I never dreamed I could be, and David has become not just the son I lost, but the man I'm incredibly proud to call my own. But our story didn't end with just our reunion. As news of our case spread, other families came forward with similar experiences. The investigation into Sacred Heart Children's Services led to criminal charges and a class action lawsuit that helped reunite 17 other families who had been torn apart by the same cruel scheme. We couldn't get back our lost time, but we could ensure that the truth was finally told and that justice was served. The most healing part of this entire experience has been watching David become a father figure to some of the other reunited children who weren't as fortunate as we were. Some of their birth parents had died during the intervening years, never knowing their children were alive. Some of their adoptive experiences hadn't been as positive as David's. He started a support group for adult adoptees who had been victims of illegal adoption practices, and seeing him help others heal has shown me the incredible man he became despite, or perhaps because of the difficult circumstances of his early life. Today, I want to leave you with this truth: it's never too late for miracles. For 43 years, I believed my greatest loss had defined my life. I let grief and pain shape every decision I made, every relationship I avoided, every dream I abandoned. But life had other plans. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about our lives aren't the whole truth. Sometimes the endings we think are final are actually just beginnings we haven't reached yet. If you're carrying pain from your past, if you believe that certain doors are closed forever, if you've given up hope on dreams that seem impossible, please don't. My son found me through DNA and determination and the kind of love that refuses to give up. In our modern world, there are more ways than ever to reconnect with lost family, to heal old wounds, to discover that the stories we've been told aren't always true. What's your miracle story? Have you ever discovered that something you believed was true actually wasn't? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories inspire me every day. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to hear more life stories that remind us that hope and love can overcome even the cruelest circumstances. And remember, it's never too late for the life you were meant to live.